Hello, my fellow people of the plant. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast, your favorite podcast that includes industry-facing conversations with the industry's leading experts that aim to educate and inform the public regarding the plant's endless benefits. My guest today is Bryan McLaren. He's the CEO at Zoned Properties. Bryan, what's going on, man?
Hey, Kevin, great to be with you today.
Yeah, great to be with you too, man. I'm excited to be talking with you. For the audience listening, before we started recording, we were really jumping into the quote unquote silent battles, I think is what you've termed it, Bryan. And
Yep.
It's really, at the level of the municipalities, the counties that are talking about cannabis zoning, laws and discussions and city ordinances and how they're going to go about implementing legalization in adult use states. So very interesting topic. Before we dive into that, Bryan, let's just talk about you and your background. So from my understanding, before cannabis, you were working in urban development, being appointed to commissions and so on. So why don't you talk about that and how that's been a great translation into what you do now?
Yeah, awesome, man. And before I share that, I just got to say, so interesting how I came across just beyond seeing your name over the kind of past few years. I constantly poll people on just what are the top 5 cannabis podcasts you're listening to? Like, where's the good stuff going? And your podcast popped up so many times. I just was like to our team one day, like, we got to reach out to Kevin and see what's going on over there. So
well, I appreciate that, man. I'm the facilitator of these conversations. I just have great guests on. So, hey,
awesome, man.
It's a teamwork there. So thank you for that.
And happy to be here chatting with you. So thanks
Absolutely.
for that.
Yes.
For viewers and listeners here, my name is Bryan McLaren with a company called Zoned Properties. We're based out here in Arizona. We're a real estate company that focuses primarily on the regulated cannabis space, but really the reason we arrived there is because our expertise and background is in complex and highly regulated marketplaces. So what we try and do in our whole team is approach real estate development, permitting, zoning, design, construction, and how we can help empower business operators and real estate owners succeed in those projects, especially the really complicated pieces of that. And how really I got into this is after years of my graduate experience kind of on the academic side, was really focused on urban planning, sustainable development, and really that local community level. Like, how do decisions and the development of our physical communities affect human well-being? All of us that live, work, and play in these environments. And I just became so fascinated with the urban planning side. Definitely consider myself kind of a urban planning nerd. But it's just remarkable. I mean,
it's stuff that we take for granted. I feel like,
that's it.
It's like, I mean, the everyday citizen is going through their city and they're going through their parks and they're driving on their highways, but they're not thinking about the civic engineering and the thought and the planning that goes into all the unintended consequences that would happen if you didn't foresee some of that stuff, right?
Yeah, totally, Kevin. Yeah, and it's one of the really cool kind of overlap nexus points in the cannabis industry that I love, especially coming from the sustainability and sustainable development industry, is it's all about the grassroots movement. So I mean, 100 years of trying to lift and reverse prohibition, and in the past few decades, some really exciting progress with regulated cannabis. It's the same thing in sustainable development, the same thing in community planning. I mean, we're all busy in our everyday lives trying to, okay, how do I buy this property next week and develop it this year? Whereas local planners and officials, they're like, okay, what's 15 years from now in the master plan? So we're all driving around our communities and it's like, oh, it's really cool how like around the park are these really intentional retail businesses. And like, that's a lot of times a vision someone had 20, 30 years ago. So
absolutely, right? I mean, because a park is a center where the public goes to gather and hang out. And then over time, you're thinking, okay, what other assets can I put within those areas, like businesses, like restaurants,
right.
like retail stores, right? So
Yep.
It is,
Totally.
yeah, it's totally proactive planning at its most highest.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's really my first major professional exposures in that realm were around sustainable development, renewable energy, and I spent several years at the local level having conversations in city council meetings, in commission meetings about how our local code for things like plastic, one-time single-use disposable plastic bans, like just things that like a lot of us are on page with, like this doesn't make sense, how do we change this? Behind the scenes, these silent battles, as I call them, definitely in regulated cannabis, and certainly not my coined term, but that is, there is a whole strategy and approach that leads to success in that process. And certainly there's advocacy and lobbying on one hand, but then on the other hand, there's just being engaged in your local community as a member of that community, or as a voter, or as a business owner. And so that's really what
And
translated for us into the regulated cannabis space.
and I would imagine that all those parties play a really important role in that process, right?
Huge, huge. And this is probably the most exciting thing today in the cannabis industry. And I'm going to kind of jump to the end and maybe we'll connect the dots as we go here. But,
Sure.
Even 2 years ago, let alone 10, 20 years ago, and especially the giants in the cannabis movement that have come before us. I caught the episode with the D'Angelo brothers. I mean, just legends there, right?
Right.
So like back when they started advocacy, it's like if you could find a number of local planners that knew about this or having these conversations in the 90s and early thousands, you could probably count them on one or two hands.
Right.
Today, it's thousands. It's thousands of different local professionals as state by state legalization of cannabis has taken place in this grassroots style movement. And we just try and do our best to help educate those individuals. It's a lot of discussions, it's a lot of shared learning, and exciting today again, because it used to be that it took those of us cannabis specialists talking to those local planners. Now they're talking to each other. So that's where I see really the true exciting exponential momentum coming here. Is it's best practices. What did Colorado learn? What did California learn? Florida? How do we hone these best practices at the local level? And then for us at Zoned Properties, what we do is try and then connect that in the built real estate environment. And same as sustainable development. I mean, the example we give a lot of our colleagues and clients and partners, new team members, like years ago, I was trying to argue to get a city or town's first wind turbine installed. And like, if you think cannabis is a difficult discussion, try and convince a local city council that a wind turbine should go up. It's like the apocalypse.
Wow. That's so interesting, man. And I can imagine, like, I love that you talk about how there's best practices to be learned, because I've said that several times and others have echoed it on the podcast. And that's like, there's no better use case to really show how city government can collaborate and learn from one another. And of course, apply things that work for their specific or respective states, but just kind of see what's happening, because there is a movement, there's a shift, right? And we're kind of seeing this wave happen in real time. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear from your perspective, at the municipality county level, right, where these
Yeah.
ordinances are and discussions are taking place. How does that differ throughout the country? And then let's really start hyper focusing in on where Zone Properties is headquartered, which is Scottsdale, Arizona, and that market, which is new.
Yeah, great, Kevin. Well, let's maybe for listeners and viewers that aren't as familiar with cannabis that are joining the podcast, set the stage a little bit here, both from planning and from cannabis perspective, and try to always pull as close to up-to-date data as we can. But remember, everyone, this is urban planning and real estate. Some of the most recent census data is from like 2012. So right. The stuff happens sometimes kind of more glacial than we're used to. So in the United States, obviously, we have 50 states plus a bunch of different territories and districts, and we have some very exciting growth of legalization of cannabis. What used to be a handful of states, now we're looking at 35 plus states that have medical programs. We're looking at, I think it's 17 or 18 states plus a few districts and territories, full adult use programs, with more being expected to legalize. So I think those of us in the industry, true believers, the tipping point has come. Now it's not as much about, is cannabis going to happen? It's how do we do it well? And translating that then from the federal and state level down to the local, here's some interesting data points to consider. So in the United States, as of most recent data available, we have approximately 90,000 local district bodies. So what that means is, and there's several different categories, but about half of those are things like school districts, fire districts, utility districts. But the other half, a little less than half, about 40,000, are split between counties, municipalities, and townships. So those are 40,000 different local discussions that are going to regulate cannabis in your communities. Wild,
That is
right?
insane. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yep. And there's a term in urban planning that is always the scary term when it comes to how to set up your community and zoning. It's called NIMBY, not in my backyard. And so what that means is that when new emerging industries like cannabis, or industries that may be deemed by some, probably because they have wrong information, to be less desirable than others, they tend to get shoved into the corners of the community or the hidden areas of the community. That's the NIMBY, the not in my backyard. So connecting these 40,000 local discussions, the importance of using real objective data to educate local officials, our neighbors, and our businesses to start to shift and pivot this paradigm that we don't want to shove cannabis facilities into the corners of the community. They belong around the park. They belong in the areas just like other positive businesses for the community. So few other little data points.
I would imagine that that's a hard hurdle to climb for some of these municipalities, right? Because from the stigma, right, these people kind of, their first reaction is cannabis dispensaries, marijuana, gang activity, violence, right? Because it's, the lines have been blurred with that Schedule 1 ridiculous listing. So
that's right. And we still don't have the best data. We need to see years and years and years of this industry advancing to know about how to answer these discussion questions all over the place, not just at the local level, but certainly at the federal level. So the typical list of items, right, Kevin, is like, are our property values going to go down once you bring marijuana in our community? Is there more crime, tax, like?
And you're like, no, actually, data showing that they're going to go up, right? That's what I've been seeing. Yeah. So let's talk about that. What are we seeing in terms of data trends in appraisals of houses going up with dispensaries and adult use states?
So it might start to exist. I haven't seen it yet. Typically, the National Association of Realtors and other commercial real estate data groups like CoStar, CBRE are collecting some of this great data, both objectively from real transactions and subjectively from self-reporting and surveying. The best data we're starting to see is definitely that home values increase in states that have legalized or municipalities that have allowed cannabis, right? A lot of users of cannabis, a lot of advocates, something like, what is it, high 90% now of the American electorate favors legalization.
Yeah, it's 92 or something like that. The one issue that Americans all agree on, right? Except the government. I don't know.
Right. So the data is oddly impacted, right? Because like, on one hand, it's like, okay, why would property values go down? Typically, that's because a lot of people don't want to be there.
Right.
But what we know now, starting to see objectively, is people move towards places that are cannabis friendly, which means property values are going up. People move towards places with economic development, with better tax budgets, with lower crime. These are all things that are positively improving the prosperity metrics of our local communities with regulated cannabis. Mm-hmm. So those are really great tidbits of information for us to discuss, consider. I'll give you one example I use at the local level all the time. So we commissioned a local study in collaboration with the local police and fire departments to look at where the most on-spot violent crimes that were reported took place. So those would be things you never want to experience: burglaries, grand theft auto, assaults without or with a weapon. And we started to look at the areas of zoning in that community where they were intending to put cannabis, and where some of the first few cannabis dispensaries were located. And it turns out that the cannabis sites were at the absolute lowest part of the crime reported spectrum. So now that's just one anecdotal case, but
Sure.
what it tells us is, at a minimum, the assumption that cannabis will bring crime is not always correct.
Right, right.
So,
And I mean, there's
huge.
another data point outside of the real estate, discussion, and that's, opioid deaths, right? And how the rate of opioid deaths is decreasing in states where there's adult use. So there are a lot of different data points that are basically countering what the previous notion or belief was, when it again relates to the stigma of cannabis. So
Definitely. Yep.
so what else? So those are interesting data points that I can see you using at the municipal, to the county level, to kind of talk to the citizens, the elected officials. Is there any others that stand out that you're using, or are those kind of the primaries?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what I'm about to talk about is really hard to know true data. And so what I'm referencing is that the regulated cannabis industry, while we call it an emerging industry, is already an existing industry, right? We're just helping the transition from the legacy underground markets into a above ground regulated marketplace.
Right.
And so some of the data points I try to keep track of are also related to crime statistics, like data regarding impounding of illegal, quote unquote, illegal product, right? Product that's not taken through the regulated system.
Mm-hmm.
And so data we probably looked out from various cannabis professional associations that were trying to guess how big this market would be. I think at one point in time, people were hoping for like 20 billion by 2025. And the most recent figures I've seen are more like 100 billion by 2025. So the reason that's really important for the discussions I'm typically in, both with real estate owners, developers, and local communities, is that's value for economic development. That's jobs. That's investment in construction and improvement in industrial properties. So here's just a few final kind of high level data points for everyone.
Sure.
Roughly, most recent data set for commercial real estate, which would include industrial, where typically the large grow sites, processing facilities, and or kind of the edge of commercial where cannabis dispensaries typically are located, $16 trillion worth of commercial real estate in this country, approximately 6 million buildings, and a quarter of that, about 25%, is the industrial market. So that's taking out apartment complexes, office spaces. So cannabis, let's say this is going to be $100 billion or bigger dollar industry over the next kind of half decade to a decade. That's a lot of investment into built environment that's then going to turn into jobs, into tax dollars, a huge new commercial industry. So we really try to keep the focus on that for local communities. And it's not perfect. There are some communities that have had bad experiences. Mm-hmm. We're all humans. This is a diverse, the human experiment we're all living. Right. But the majority of time, what we find is that those challenges are due to poor regulatory structures. And this is a really important point, Kevin. I always try to bring this up because we do really, to the best of our ability, consider ourselves ambassadors on behalf of local planning officials. They get this dropped on their desk sometimes out of nowhere. The state legalizes, and the legalization committee or the governor or whoever wants this to happen says, you better get the program up and running by this date.
That's exactly what is happening right now in the city that I grew up in New Mexico, right? Yeah.
Exactly, right.
They had like a deadline of like two weeks, and it was the only thing that was brought up in the meeting, and it, yep.
Totally. And we should definitely talk about New Mexico. I love that marketplace. But similar what we're seeing in New York, New Jersey. So New Jersey's got a pending deadline here in like a couple weeks, August 21st of 2021, where the roughly 250 or so townships in New Jersey have to opt in or opt out of will they allow cannabis facilities in their communities.
And some states don't even like they don't even allow
Right.
that option, right? Like New Mexico
Right.
is one where you couldn't opt in or out. So yes,
Right.
go ahead.
So it's whether it's first opt in, opt out, and then regardless of that, where do you want these things? So the reason I bring this up is patience and kindness is so key in life, but in cannabis. It's like a lot of the times the way you're going to win with the local municipal regulators, director of planning, or a planning and zoning commission, or city council, or board of aldermen, the way you're going to win is first be patient, educate, and be kind. They might say no, but you can come back as that process takes place to try and get your approvals. Or you should listen to that local municipality that's telling you no and potentially go somewhere else. So not everyone has that option, but so critical. And I mean, yeah, New Mexico, a lot of progress in Santa Fe County, for example, and in Albuquerque, obviously one of the larger municipalities there. Yeah, it's like, how do we, okay, we're legal, how do we do this, how much water does it use,
It's
it's complicated.
your advice sounds like very basic, but I believe it so wholeheartedly. Like that makes a lot of sense because it's true in life, but you need to be kind and patient through this process because it's an ever evolving process, right? It's not
Right.
like what is implemented now will more than likely change down the road due
Totally.
to just how the industry is going to figure itself out, right? And having an open mind, being patient through the process, being kind to one another,
Yeah.
because like we talked about earlier, these are just regular people that are tasked with this. I mean, you got elected officials, your city council, your mayor, your city manager, city planner, right? And so they're doing their best. We're all doing our best, and we're all
That's
learning
right.
as we go. Yeah.
That's right. Totally. And just for your own advantageous process as, say, a real estate developer, or you've just won your cannabis license and you're going to develop your facility, it's not a one and done. So just because you go to get your local use permit and you get that W on the board the first time, I guarantee you will have to go back multiple times over the years for more. So taking losses in stride and figuring out how to turn them into wins, taking wins with humility and gratitude, especially for those that aren't on board with this yet. Just because you get the ability to open your retail dispensary in town doesn't mean even your immediately adjacent business neighbors are going to be happy. So it's just the best policy for your own business success to treat other people with the best, optimistic view, right? And it's not easy, man. It is tough to rein in those emotions when you're being yelled at. The citizens have the pitchforks and torches out and think you're, there to ruin their town, right? So
Right. No, those are all good points, man. And I appreciate the data points or statistics that you shared along with the background knowledge. And I want to talk to you and shift gears and talk about like the current landscape when it comes to cannabis reform at the federal level. And of course, Zone Properties is a publicly traded company. Y'all are trading within the Canadian exchanges under the ticker ZDPY. So, from my understanding, of course, you've explained the navigating through the process at the municipality and county level, right? And kind of that service of consulting and expertise. And then, from my understanding, you also do sale leasebacks. Is that correct, or is that part of your current offering?
yeah, so let me make one quick clarification. So while I am Canadian, our company is actually not. So we are traded over the counter in the U.S.
Oh,
and
I'm
we
sorry.
were
Okay.
no, totally fine, Kevin. Just for clarity for any of the
Sure.
audience members. But what's been fascinating about that is we were one of the first publicly traded companies in the U.S. that interacted with the cannabis market. Now,
Wow.
we are just real estate. We are non-plant touching. We don't receive or participate in the sale, cultivation, direct operations, right? But we've now been through 6 full years of audited SEC reporting. We bank with a prominent bank. They know exactly what we do. And it's been an interesting process over the years to watch some of that normalize. And it's an important point for what we do in real estate with compliance too, because what a lot of the United States public companies have had to do is basically reverse merge into a Canadian based or domiciled company or trade on the Canadian exchange where it's federally legal, and then do business as a foreign entity in the US, right? That's the typical move. Well, the overlap there with real estate is pretty interesting. So there are challenges, but also opportunities when you are a landlord or real estate owner or developer and you're touching regulated cannabis. And while we definitely do have a portfolio of real estate properties within Zoned that we have developed, invest in, we own them, they're leased to cannabis operators. Really, a lot of the daily bulk of our operational business is in our transactional work. So Zoned as a company has three main core verticals, and I'll try and keep this brief just for context.
Sure,
so
no, you're good. Yeah.
keep talking about the exciting industry stuff. But so our real core competencies are in both our portfolio, so acquisitions and development and leasing of properties. We have a really robust advisory team, so formulated best practices over the years and how to develop and interact through the real estate. A lot of that we learned through developing our own real estate, right? And then we have a licensed brokerage team. So we handle lease negotiation, buy-sell transactions, brokering license ownership along with the real estate. And that's been really critical in our home base here in Arizona, especially as a marketplace legalizes. And in Arizona, we went from medical to adult use this past year. So we like to call them dancing partners when we talk about what we do. And what I mean by that is you have, in a state like Arizona, a limited number of vertically licensed marijuana operators, and you have a limited supply of real estate that can be zoned and permitted for that specific use. So the whole role that our team at Zoned Properties plays is trying to match up those dancing partners.
Wow.
And it's fun. I mean, I'm very passionate about it. I love what we do, but it can be really challenging. Not just, there may only be so many dancing partners available, but are you even going to be a good match, even if it's possible, right?
Right. Yeah, you're playing the ultimate matchmaker. I mean, both on, of course, do their business models fit, right? Is it copacetic, the relationship, and then are they going to get along, right? I mean, is the relationship even going to thrive? So
yeah. And Kevin, for context, specifically in Arizona, the history of the marketplace is pretty fascinating. So what started as a medical only program that's transitioned now into a kind of dual medical and adult use under this original set of 130 vertical licenses. So in Arizona, those vertical licenses allow those license holders to grow, process, distribute, and then retail cannabis products, marijuana products. Wow. And you can wholesale them amongst each other. So full vertical integration up and down and full wholesale B2B integration across the board. And then we have 2 new rounds of licenses. And unless state level legislation changes, that's all there will ever be. We had a rural county license round that issued 13 more vertical licenses that happened this past year. And we have a social equity program upcoming later this December 2021 that will issue 26 more vertical licenses.
Oh, that's great.
So that's it. That's all the dancing partners on that side, right? And what's interesting about the real estate and urban planning is you might think it's intuitive that as legalization and adoption happens, that permitting and zoning would loosen up, that NIMBY attitude I talked about would get easier. It actually tends to be the exact opposite. So maybe it's the precautionary principle, something the opt-out townships in New Jersey, this is a big deal. Like, we don't have enough time to consider this truly, so let's just opt out. We can always opt back in. That tends to be the move, that conservative nature of how to regulate and adopt code locally. So as legalization and the evolution of cannabis is coming, globally here, the real estate opportunities tend to tighten. So there's only, 130 original in Arizona, plus these new 39. and there's less and less real estate on the monopoly board, right? Because dancing partners are pairing up, they're buying property, entering into 20-year lease agreements. And so it's every day is a challenge, right?
Every day the window of opportunity is like closing, right? I mean, in a sense where like, because it's like you're at the ground floor from Zone Properties perspective of when these states go online. I mean,
Yeah,
you're right at the beginning, and then you're solidified and there for the
right.
next 20 years or so. I mean,
Yeah. And
depending on the deal, but
that's right. Yeah, and Arizona is definitely our home base. It's our backyard. It's where we grew up as a company, as a team. Where the most of our business takes place. So we have owned and acquired properties in other states as well that we've, for many reasons, divested, and currently our entire portfolio is in Arizona. But our advisory and brokerage team does business nationwide. So I personally have worked in now over 13 states or over 15 states in a bunch of different capacities. So helping at the state level, code and regulatory perspective when it comes to how that state legalization is then going to kind of trickle down and impact local communities. We do a lot of work related to getting ready for new markets, so like New York, New Jersey, and we have a few strategic projects, both on the property technology, data and software side, as well as a retail franchise project. And for us, the whole goal here, I'm gonna borrow a phrase from one of our partners over at Zonomics. It's all about democratizing the real estate for cannabis. And that piece of this industry, the transition from legacy to regulated, and especially the social equity piece of this evolution is so critical. It's something we really care about. And that real estate has typically been, I mean, think back at these numbers, right? $16 trillion worth of commercial real estate in this country. Real estate has very typically been a wealthy person's game. So cannabis, it's so important that we help solve these really complex challenges for everyone, for mom and pop operators, for legacy cannabis experts that maybe have never had a bank account. Maybe they've had to deal in cash for 3 generations. We want to help them deal with how to do construction right, how to find the right general contractor, how to deal with architects and engineers and not get ripped off. How do you go and borrow commercial real estate money and put it in appropriately? Sometimes that's a sale leaseback. So I know you mentioned that earlier, Kevin. So we do look at sale leaseback transactions. And for audience members who aren't in commercial real estate, a sale leaseback is very simply what it sounds. You take an operator that owns their own real estate, that operator sells it to a third party, typically a real estate company. Most of the ones that do leasebacks are called REITs, real estate investment trusts. And then that new owner of the property leases it back to the previous owner for a long period of time and has just paid them a good sum of money to acquire the real estate. And this has been absolutely critical in cannabis. So Zoned is not a REIT. We're a real estate development company. And while we do invest in and acquire, we don't have the formal tax designation as a REIT. And we can talk about that too if we want to, but that's far more financial and accounting designation stuff. The important factor is that cannabis has been such a challenge to pull the millions and millions and now billions of dollars that are required to build all these facilities. Commercial construction is really expensive. And if you can't get typical bank financing, if you can't get typical institutional commercial lending, like has been such a challenge and still today is a challenge, you really have to look to these private real estate trusts that have been absolutely essential in plugging in that capital into the industry. Now, there's pros and cons to doing that deal. You no longer own and necessarily control your own real estate. There's plenty of cannabis operators and license holders that may never want to go that route. But it's part of just getting the evolution of this industry moving forward, right?
Right.
So,
right. No, I appreciate you giving that overview. That's really helpful in terms of really specifically what Zone Properties focuses on and does. And I love that you also really focus on that restorative justice component, as this industry is moving along, because to your point, it's so important that we make sure that everyone, kind of has a shot at being successful in this industry, right? And we all kind of start from at least a fair level playing field. And so it's great to hear. And you touched on the focus of technology and software. And when you talked earlier about the matchmaking component, right, with the dance partners, I'm thinking about like some dating app where you're swiping left and right. But
Right.
in all seriousness, like what type of technology are you and data insights are you looking to when it comes to the matchmaking component of your services?
Yeah, it's so important, Kevin, and I love that it's a kind of core value of your podcast and discussions too. Something we definitely have like-minded kind of stance on. So as I mentioned just kind of a few moments ago, that the real estate game has for a long time been held and controlled by the wealthy. So that phrase I used that I took from the CEO and founder of a company called Zonomics, his name's Matthew Player. And maybe next time we come back, I'll bring him on and we can kind of talk more about this.
Yes. Yeah.
So he runs this platform called Zonomics. It's a non-cannabis platform, and its whole goal is a geoinformation systems, GIS, mapping data and software tool for land developers. It allows you to go into a municipality, a state, an area, and quite efficiently and effectively look at what parcels of land, what buildings interact with the code. So how tall can you build your building? What's the zoning designation? And this is at the core of what's so challenging for real estate development in cannabis, is not just that the codes and regulations are different everywhere, not just that they change all the time, but that specifically that blueprint for the zoning code tends to have really custom, unique elements. For example, one of those relates to something called a protected use, in that your prospective and hopeful cannabis dispensary or cultivation site has to be 1,000 feet from a school, 500 feet from a park, and it makes this kind of potpourri checkerboard of where you can go. In the industry, you might hear it as a green zone property. And certainly where we got our name years ago, zoned properties, right?
Right.
So what we've been developing with Matt and his team at Zonomics is based on his phrase that I'm sure he got from someone else as well, and one of his mentors, but democratizing real estate development. So putting this information cost effectively and efficiently in the hands of the masses, and definitely as it relates to social equity license holders and local mom and pop operators in cannabis, that they don't have to go hire some super expensive land use attorney or expert, frankly, even like our team, to go find this information. And if you don't have a platform like a mapping software and technology database, you have to wade through all these local websites and public reports and public record requests. If you haven't done it before, it's really challenging. So our hope for this new platform, which very new, we're still developing the technology, but it's based upon his existing proprietary system that uses AI to scrub local codes, find these different zoning maps where they exist, and integrate it into a platform where a user can get on and basically plug in the variables of what they're looking for. It's not going to give a perfect outcome. The groups that have tried to do that over the years, most of them have failed because cannabis is too complicated. There is no perfect yes or no, right? So what we're trying to do is just
no perfect size fits all, right?
That's it. Perfection's the enemy of progress. So we're just trying to help with the evolution, get this information organized in a way that the most number of people can use it. And certainly even large brokerage houses, active real estate professionals, it hopefully will be a resource for them as well.
I would imagine
data side.
I would imagine the data collection is going to help inform like the platform itself later on as well, right? Because with more data and AI, it just kind of it figures itself out and it kind of works off patterns and right.
That's the hope. That's the hope, right? But I mean, there's no magical formula aside from that. I mean, for now, almost 10 years, how we've built our database is every time I see an article about a new grow site, I put it in my spreadsheet, right? So now we're tracking 1,000 projects across the country. from various levels. A lot of them we have had involvement in, a lot of them we have not, but still just trying to figure out how to best help this industry. And then again, for us, Zone Properties as a public company, we're also operating on behalf of not just all the stakeholders we interact with, but our shareholders as well. So we've really built out this transactional advisory brokerage data projects as a way to help inform our company on where the best and most valuable investment opportunities come in, and really, frankly, who's worthy of them. So, if we have a limited pool of money to deploy to help operators build their real estate, I mean, we really care about being good stewards of the community. We want good operators that are going to have those shared values using that investment as well.
I like that you brought that last part up, right? Because man, that's such a sensitive subject when it comes to a community that, maybe has its own values or its own culture or its own. And so that matchmaking component that you talked about, I mean, there's so many layers to it, and it's just making sure that the right operators with the right intentions,
Yeah.
are also placed in those communities so that it doesn't disrupt their daily lives, right? I mean,
Yeah.
because as what you shared earlier, from the trends that we're seeing, real estate, commercial, real estate properties are going up, home valuations are going up, opioid deaths are decreasing. So there's a lot of good from this.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
need to make sure that the right people are involved, right? So
Totally. And for operators and business owners and license holders and consumers, I think one of the things that's really important that we try to assist with is setting realistic expectations. I mean, while we're super passionate about this as a property owner and landlord, the reality is very likely if you're leasing a commercial space for cannabis, your landlord pretty much just cares about collecting a check and their property's safe. That's the idealist in me hopes that a majority of property owners really care about the local community, but having the expectation as a tenant in your commercial site that your landlord's going to might set you up for some challenging discussions, right? So
right.
Important to know. And likewise with local community members, we all care about cannabis. It's probably the top of our daily list, but the mayor of a community has got 1,000 other things going on. So cannabis is just one. But yeah, I mean, again, Kevin, thank you so much for the invitation, for the platform. I could talk about this stuff for hours and days, and
I can see your passion. I can see that you're passionate about it, and that's the kind of operators and leaders that we need in this industry. So really appreciate your time today, Bryan. I learned a lot about the silent battles and just some of the challenges, but also opportunities, right, that this industry is presenting. And like you said earlier, be patient, be kind during this process, because we're all trying to figure it out. We're doing our best, So where can people find y'all's website and social media if they want to learn more about Zone Properties?
Yeah, definitely. And for any viewers, audience members, whether you're getting into the cannabis industry, a consumer, an ancillary, just onlooker, please reach out to us. Happy to spread education, make connections, and have those discussions. So easiest would be just to go to our website, www.zonedproperties.com. You can also send me an email directly if you'd like, Bryan, Bryan, @zonedproperties.com. And then we try as best as we can mostly we use Twitter and LinkedIn, but typically on our Twitter stream, anytime I see a local journalist cover local zoning related to cannabis, I'm just retweeting it as fast as I can. So, if you see your town pop up and the cannabis discussion is happening, don't be afraid to get in there, make your voice heard, talk about what this means to you, and ask questions. So please reach out to us, visit us, and we'll be as much help as we can.
Awesome. Hey, well, I really enjoyed it again, Bryan. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. Bye.
Thanks, guys.